Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of sound design for video games. Today we're going to be creating a checkpoint sound. This is what it's going to sound like. I'll go through another one. Now this video is going to be broken up into two parts. There's going to be part one, which is right now the creation of the checkpoint sound, and part two will be about the actual implementation of that sound, so getting it into Unreal Engine and getting it functioning correctly. So let's continue on here with the actual creation of the checkpoint sound. Now the first thing I want us to think about is, what are the actual goals? Ultimately, what do we want the player to feel? And what can sometimes help is if you actually list some things that you want the player to feel. So I've got here, I want the player to feel excitement, satisfaction, I want it to feel uplifting, happy, sense of achievements. Now we are going to be outside of Unreal Engine for this. I want us to actually work inside of the DAW of your choice. I'm going to be working in Cubase, but I do want to make the point, you could do this completely inside of Unreal Engine using the Metasound system. Now moving on, we're going to be layering three different types of sounds. There's going to be a melodic jingle. This will use a scale of notes that are ultimately selected to evoke a certain emotion in the player. We're going to have a pad, which is going to thicken up the overall sound of the checkpoints. There's going to be a percussive element just to add a little bit of weight and impact for when that moment happens. Now let's start with the jingle, and we're going to talk about the scale in particular right now, which is ultimately going to be what determines the emotion that the player will feel. Now over here in Cubase, if I double click on my little checkpoint thing here, what I have is a simple chord, and on the synth we have an arpeggio, which is helping that chord voice in a certain way, and this is what it sounds like. Now the reason we chose these sequence of notes is because what it has is tension and release. So these sort of bottom three will have a sense of tension, and the top note here will have a sense of release as it hits that crest of the scale. And the reason for that is because what we're basically playing is a C major. Now this D note here is going to serve as tension. Now because it's the first note we hear, the ear won't necessarily recognize it as tension until it's got the context of that E and the G. But once it's got that context, it wants to hear, okay? So that's basically the idea. Now it's using obviously a major chord, lots of big jumps and intervals, which is going to create that sense of happiness, sense of achievement that we were talking about in the previous slide. So that's basically the idea of the scale. Obviously you could pick something sad, for instance. You could do something like this. That's going to evoke obviously a sad, dark, slightly dramatic emotion. You could pick something happy like this. Something like that. I'm going to quickly show you the arpeggio now. So if I click on this little area here on the synth I have open, there's options here to make an arpeggio. So if you've never done this before, it's very simple. You simply write the notes. So if I get rid of all these, no sound will come out. As you can see, if I put this, you'll get the second note of that chord. I'll just open this up now so I can actually demonstrate it. See, we have four notes being played. So what we can do is we can tell the arpeggio how we want those four notes to be played. So I want them to go up like this. So we start with the D note and we come up and we crest at that C note. We get that nice sound. But you can do it like this. You could have it go up and then down and then up to the top note, which will sound like this. You could have it hit the top note straight away and then come back down. Like that. Now, with it being such a short checkpoint, it is nice that it just rises and hits the top note, so I'm going to leave it like that. You also have other controls to take into consideration, so you can do the steps. Obviously we only have 4 steps because it's a very quick sound. If you wanted a slightly longer arpeggio, you might make that 8 steps or 16 steps. The rate is essentially how quick it's going to go. So I can change this to 16, 1/16th, and we don't even finish the note. So I'll have to actually lengthen this here. So you can hear there it's quite slow. Because it is a checkpoint sound, we want it nice and quick. So I'm going to put that back to 1/32. And now it's repeating. I need to shorten this again. The next thing I want to talk about is the ADSR. So when you're working with synthesis, ADSR is very important. It basically means attack, decay, sustain, and release. And it looks something like this. So when you make any sound in a synthesizer, you're taking into consideration the attack period, which is this phase. There's the decay period, which is basically after the attack period is over, how quickly does that sound then come down from that attack. So if you think of like an acoustic guitar, you pluck the string, it attacks fairly quickly, but then it decays quite quickly as well. So you get that almost percussive element from the string pluck. It's what ultimately makes a pluck sound like a pluck. The sustain phase is how long that note can keep going. So if you think of like a piano, when you hit a piano, the hammer hits the string and the string vibrates until the hammer either rests on it, which then dulls the string and eventually stops the vibration, or it will vibrate until the string has lost its energy and it can no longer vibrate anymore, and then the sound will stop. The release is how quickly you can release that sound and stop it. So if you take a piano for instance again, if you release a note, bring your hand off the keys for instance, the hammers come back down and it dulls the strings and then the note stops. So let's go and take a look at that inside of the synthesizer. Now right here is the amp envelope, and what we have is the ADSR. So you can see if I make the attack go slower, you can hear those notes are becoming more slurred, less defined, because the attack is not clean enough. So sometimes that can sound really nice. We can also make it very quick on the attack. You can kind of hear every note very clearly there. If we want those notes to sound more percussive, we can now bring the decay down, which is going to have the effect of, as soon as that attack happens, it's going to clamp down and make that attack sound more pronounced. Give it a little bit more again. So you can hear that sounds a little bit more spiky. Obviously it's such a quick sound, we don't have to worry about sustain and we don't have to worry about release. Let's go over some controls for the synthesizer. The first thing I want to highlight is the mono button. What it basically does is it ensures that each note is heard independently to each other, so it doesn't allow multiple notes to be played. So with it checked in like this, if I click a load of notes on the keyboard, let's turn off the arpeggio just for now. So it basically plays the first note that you hit. Now if I go over to legato, I'll show you another button that's quite helpful. Basically legato means that basically the energy is being depleted with each consecutive note. So if I do up the scale like this, you can hear it slowly getting quieter. And if I turn that off, you can see the energy is always there at exactly the same moment. So if you're getting a little bit more of a human feel, that's quite a nice touch that you can add. The slide button does what it says on the tin. Basically it allows the notes to slide from one place to another. So it's quite useful for getting them to kind of mix together. So if I use this with my arpeggio, if I just click it on, there we go. I'll make the slide a little bit slower. You can hear it's kind of just sliding up each note. You can't hear each individual note being voiced as we bring it in. Bring it in. So I'm using a little bit of slide just to add that sort of humanizing element to it, so that not every note is perfectly separate. But you could have it perfectly 0 and have those notes have complete clarity. So it's really down to your preference. I like a little bit of slide personally. Now with the jingle elements of the checkpoint, we are layering together 3 different sounds. We have a saw dual 01 on 1 here, a square wave on 2, and another saw dual 01. And here we have a load of controls where we can start to differentiate further these 3 different waves. So if I scroll through them, you can see they are slightly different from one another. If you click over here, you can pick a specific wave, and you can also scroll through each one, 1, 2, and 3. And if I go down to the oscillator section here, we can see them and how they're mixed together inside of the synthesizer. So here's sound 1. Here's sound 2, the square wave. And here's sound 3. As you can hear, is the most dominant sound, and here they all are together. Layering's a really important thing to do in synthesis. It basically allows you to create a unique sound. If you're relying on, you know, perfectly normal sawtooth waves and square waves and sine waves and triangle waves, obviously it's hard to create something unique. So layering's one way where you can try and shape a sound the way that you want it. Now we talked about the jingle part of our checkpoint sound, now we're going to talk about the pad part. There's not an awful lot to talk about here. What I did want to mention is with some synthesizers they have sampler sections which basically allow you to load up audio. So let's go over that now. If I solo this and I press play, that is the little pad sound that we've got mixed into our checkpoint sound. Now if I go to the oscillator section and I press play, you can see oscillator 4 and 5 are, well, they have sounds and all the rest don't. So the way this synthesizer works is 1, 2 and 3 are for wavetable synthesizers, which is basically your simple waveforms. Oscillator 4 to 6 is for the sampler. So we have 4, 5 and 6. 6 is empty, I've not got anything loaded up. But on 4 I have a sample called Bell Wall, and on 5 I have a sample called Wall Chord 2. So let's take a listen to them. Here's Bell Wall. And here is Wall Chord 2. And together they sound like this. So there's not much more to say about that, just that you can use real audio that you can load in. Now moving on to the percussive element, there's not an awful lot to go through here either. We're just loading up a kick sample, which sounds like this. So we're using the sampler section like we did with the pad sound. And we're adding a little bit of reverb to it, and that's pretty much it. Now all of those together sound like this. And that's everything for today. In the next episode we will be going over how to get those sounds into Unreal Engine and implement them correctly in a checkpoint system. But until then, thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time.